When cold cases remain unsolved for years at a time, hope begins to dwindle that they will ever be solved. And in many of these cases, no resolution is ever found. But on some occasions, a cold case is finally solved when an unexpected clue is found or new forensic techniques are implemented. Number 5. On the 6th of August, 1999, Melissa Mooney, a 28-year-old secretary at the Wilmington FBI field office in North Carolina, was ready to move into a new house, and she had asked some of her coworkers to give her a hand with the move. But on the morning of the move, Melissa, who was known to be punctual, didn't show up for work and wasn't answering phone calls from agents at the office. They decided to drive to her home, and when they arrived, they found that her car was still parked in the driveway. On her front door, they found a large boot print, and it appeared to have been kicked in. One of the agents entered the house and found Melissa deceased on her bedroom floor. A massive investigation was launched, and since FBI agents were too close to the victim to take the lead, the new Hanover County Sheriff's Office was asked to process the crime. Investigators established a hotline with 6 dedicated phone lines for anyone with information to contact them, and a list was compiled of everyone who had recently been released from nearby prisons in case a likely suspect emerged. Agents from Dallas, San Francisco, and Philadelphia all helped to track down contacts in her address book, and those who were found were interviewed, but to no avail. At first, Melissa's ex-husband was a suspect, as they had been involved in a bitter custody battle, but he was eventually cleared and it became a cold case. 2 years later, the case was revisited, and Melissa's neighborhood was canvassed once more. This time, a man named Tyrone Delgado, who had told police 2 years earlier that he hadn't seen or heard anything, started acting strangely when he was questioned and refused to answer any more questions. His behavior was concerning enough for agents to start digging into his past, and they found that he'd been a suspect in a break-in in which a woman was assaulted, and she showed bruising that was remarkably similar to the bruises found on Melissa. Added to that, when a DNA sample was taken from Delgado, it matched a hair found at the crime scene, and he was arrested. It took a jury less than 4 hours to return a guilty verdict, and Delgado was sentenced to life in prison. Number 4. On the 25th of April 2010, Heidi Ferguson, the wife of Nicholas Ferguson, called 911 at 6:30 a.m. from her cell phone to report that someone was attempting to break into her house in St. Paul, Minnesota. The dispatcher asked her for an address, and 38 seconds into the call, heard a noise similar to a firearm being discharged, and Heidi stopped speaking. The call then went dead, and the dispatcher attempted to phone back, but calls went to voicemail. About a minute later, Nicholas Ferguson called 911 from Heidi's phone in a highly emotional state, saying that someone had broken into their home and that he and Heidi had been fired upon and hit while they were trying to escape through the back of their garage. Responding officers entered the house and found the couple inside. They discovered that Heidi was deceased and Nicholas had been struck in his upper left thigh. When listening back to Heidi's 911 call, investigators noted that before the sound of a firearm being discharged, there was no significant background noise, and she gave no indication that someone actually made it into the house. After being discharged from the hospital, Nicholas was asked to attend an interview at the police station, and he told them that the house had been foreclosed upon, and they'd been planning out to move later the same day. He added that he and Heidi hadn't told their family and friends about the move yet. It was found that the house had been sold at a sheriff's auction 10 months earlier, but when Nicholas's cell phone and email records were investigated, it was found to be unlikely that Heidi knew about the foreclosure, or that they had to move out of the house. There also wasn't any sign that they'd been packing to leave, and no sign was found of alternative living arrangements being made. But despite all these facts, there wasn't enough evidence pointing at Nicholas, and it became a cold case. Then, a decade later, St. Paul Police Sergeant Nicole Sipes rebuilt the case with the help of the FBI and agents from the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, as well as assistant prosecutors. They found that there were serious discrepancies in Nicholas's story, such as the fact that there was no indication made during Heidi's 911 call that an intruder had managed to enter the house. Yet police can be heard entering the house during Nicholas's call, which he only made a minute later. He's now been charged with murder and could face up to 40 years in jail. Number 3. In 1969, 24-year-old Mary Scott was working at the Star and Garter Club in Southern California. When she didn't arrive for her shift on the 20th of November, one of her coworkers, Dolores Christopherson, went to her house and was shocked to find that her life had been taken. When investigators arrived at her apartment, they found that the door was broken and there were obvious signs of a struggle. They concluded that she was getting ready for bed the previous evening and heard a knock at the door. She then opened it slightly with the security chain still attached, but the offender hit hard enough to not only break the chain but also the door molding. The cab driver who took her home that night and multiple other people were interviewed, but no leads were found and it turned into a cold case. Then in February of 2020, detectives assisted by FBI agents compared DNA found at the scene against genealogy databases and found that John Sipos came back as a possible match. When his military records were checked, they found that he was stationed at Naval Air Station Miramar, just 2 miles from Mary's apartment. On the 22nd of July, FBI agents decided to go through his trash and found a recently discarded bandage. DNA found on the bandage matched with what was found at the crime scene, and he was arrested. Sipos denied any involvement, and if he is found guilty, he'll be sentenced to 25 years to life behind bars. Number 2. In June of 1967, brothers James and Leon Clay had just robbed a pawn shop in Little Rock, Arkansas, and they were fleeing from the crime scene, looking for a getaway car. They spotted James Ricks, a 27-year-old man, sitting in his 1964 Oldsmobile, and they saw it as the perfect opportunity. They forced their way into the vehicle and drove off with Ricks still inside. After making their getaway, they ended his life with a firearm and disposed of him in rural Jackson County, where he was eventually found on the 27th of August. 2 weeks after Ricks was reported missing, the two brothers would be found in Ellicott County, Maryland, still driving Ricks' car, and they were arrested. They would be convicted in federal court of transporting in interstate commerce, since they were in possession of stolen firearms and in Ricks' vehicle. They were, however, never charged with taking his life. Then in 2012, James Clay, the only surviving brother, was serving time at the Sussex prison for an attempted bank robbery that he committed in October of 2011. He tried to hold up a county bank near Laurel while wearing a mask, but fled when the teller informed him that she didn't have any money. While incarcerated, he bragged to his cellmate that he'd gotten away with ending Rick's life, recounting the crime in great detail. He said that they had just robbed the pawn shop when their car broke down. They were walking along a set of train tracks when they found Ricks sleeping in his car. James knocked on the window and woke him up. Clay discharged his weapon, hitting Ricks, though the attack wasn't fatal. They then put him in the trunk of his own car and drove to Newport in Jackson County. They found a secluded area and tied him to a tree, but realized that they would be in just as much trouble for the attacks as they would be for ending his life, which they did after cruelly telling him that they would send someone to come and get him. But Clay's cellmate was paying close attention, and he contacted the FBI's Baltimore office. They interviewed him on the 17th of April, 2012, after Clay had been released from prison on probation. In December, the man was asked by agents to wear a recording device for 2 meetings with Clay. The first was at a probation office, and the second was in Clay's truck. During both conversations, Clay again admitted to ending Rick's life, adding that at his trial, Rick's widow was staring at him, and if looks could kill, he'd no longer be alive. FBI agents then contacted Jackson County authorities, who placed him under arrest. His trial took place in 2015, and he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Number 1. Richard Wilburn, a 56-year-old man from Rochester, New York, was finally arrested in 2016 for his role in a 2003 cold case involving a bank robbery, in which Raymond Batzel, a customer at the bank, lost his life. On the morning of the 13th of August that year, Wilburn walked into a Xerox Federal Credit Union building disguised as an FBI agent. He told employees that he was there to conduct a security assessment and a staged robbery. After questioning bank staff about their security protocols, he then produced 2 firearms and robbed the bank of more than $10,000. A brief verbal altercation broke out between Wilburn and Batzel, after which he discharged one of his weapons, striking Batzel in the neck and ending his life. No suspects were ever found during the investigation into the crime, and it eventually became an unsolved cold case. Then, in March of 2016, members of the public were asked for their help in solving the case. Billboards showing the suspect's face were set up across western New York, and at long last, there was a break in the case. A man told FBI agents that he had seen Wilburn sporting what appeared to be an FBI raid jacket prior to the robbery. He added that Wilburn had been a Xerox employee, but had been fired and filed a lawsuit against the company for racial discrimination, which he ultimately lost. Then, quite unbelievably, Wilburn contacted the FBI on 5 separate occasions to file a complaint about a real estate scam. They decided to meet with him and did so on 3 different occasions. During one of the meetings, they asked him to sign paperwork related to his complaint, and after he did so, he sealed it in an envelope after licking it. They extracted DNA from the envelope and matched it to DNA found on an umbrella that he'd left at the scene of the robbery, sealing his fate. 13 years after the fact, Wilburn was finally arrested and charged with bank robbery resulting in death, as well as weapons charges. He was found guilty and will spend the rest of his life in prison after receiving a life sentence. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.